In Thursday's red and blue political roundup, the House overwhelmingly approved a resolution condemning bigotry and hate. The vote comes after Congresswoman Ilhan Omar fell under scrutiny for making controversial remarks widely seen as anti-Semitic. The measure does not mention Omar by name. Thursday's vote took place after an initial draft was amended to be more broad. The final version condemns anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim bias equally. During the vote, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said, quote, "All elements of our society are facing acts of hatred," and added this from the House floor.
It is in the spirit of unity and solidarity with my colleagues as we come together in this chamber of our American democracy to condemn all forms of hatred, racism, prejudice, and discrimination with a hopefully single and strong voice.
Let's bring in Kevin Cirilli. He's the chief Washington correspondent for Bloomberg News. All right, Kevin, good to see you. Let's start with this resolution. It took an all-inclusive approach, but was that enough to satisfy all of the people who had disagreements?
No. Look, there's no question, Elaine, that this was a direct response to anti-Semitic comments made by the freshman congresswoman from Minnesota, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. And there's also no question that Speaker Pelosi was facing intense pushback from multiple fronts, including within her own party. This was not just Republican criticism. This was coming from a host of different lawmakers within the Democratic Party, as well as top Democratic officials. People like former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, people like Chelsea Clinton weighing in on these remarks. And there really is no other way than to read these tweets word for word as anti-Semitic. What was interesting, and interesting might not be the correct word usage here, was that even after issuing an apology, this congresswoman then proceeded to tweet just a couple of days ago and got new criticism. I was speaking with some progressives, Elaine, including one progressive just earlier today about this very issue from the Progressive Campaign Committee, and Adam Green. And what Adam had to say was, you know, she was trying to make a point, but it wasn't the best, it wasn't the most artful way to make that point. And that's putting it mildly.
Yeah, and this really has exposed these divides. So I wonder, Kevin, what kind of long-lasting impacts potentially might we see, especially in the House, after this resolution?
Well, two things. First and foremost, you're absolutely correct. I totally agree. And when you look at the divides that have emerged, when you have Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the freshman progressive, self-described socialist, democratic socialist from New York, urging Speaker Pelosi to make this legislation, or rather this piece that they voted on, to be more expansive, to not just single out Congresswoman Omar. Then you have the 2020 chatter around this as well, that this should not just have been a target to Congresswoman Omar. Reportedly, there was a closed-door meeting of Democrats who wanted to see what was voted on more expansive and not just a response to Congresswoman Omar. That shows a divide. But the second point that I would quickly make, Elaine, is that for Speaker Pelosi, I mean, you know this from covering the partial government shutdown. It looks like it was more difficult for her to navigate these tough political waters within her own party than it was to deal with President Trump.
Right. That's such an excellent point, Kevin, and really kind of makes you wonder about what lies ahead here. So the entire House voted on this resolution, but the spotlight has really been on these internal struggles within the Democrats. The question is, how have Republicans then responded to the controversy, and what might that portend for the future when it comes to the Republican line of attack?
Well, the Republicans had quickly condemned Congresswoman Omar, and Democrats that had responded, well, where were you, and from their point of view, in responding to President Trump and his remarks, and of course, then Congressman King, a Republican from Iowa, who has made racist remarks. So, I mean, you know, I think I've heard the term as a reporter, I have heard the term whataboutism from Republicans and Democrats in the past week in covering this ongoing escalation. The bottom line, like it or lump it, the reason that we're here today is because of the anti-Semitic tweets from Congresswoman Omar.
All right, well, from one resolution to another, the Senate is expected to vote next week to block the president's national emergency declaration. It passed the democratically controlled House easily last month. Do we know if the White House has put any pressure on Senate Republicans ahead of the vote?
Well, they're ready to veto. And quite frankly, I was speaking with some communications advisors to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Elaine, and what they say is bring it on, because from their perspective, it would help the president to be able to throw down a veto and separate him from Congress. Because remember, he ran as that political outsider. So they don't mind necessarily contrasting that. What's interesting are the Republicans who are going against the White House. It's centrists like Senator Susan Collins. It's also Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. He's someone who has a very close line of communication to President Trump and is not someone who I think himself would even say that he's not a centrist. So it has been interesting to see this political divide. What I gather from my reporting is that the president is going to have much more of a tough fight in the legal sense from the lawsuits that are questioning the legality of his declaration of a national emergency that'll make its way through the courts, more so than the veto, because it would be very unlikely that that Congress would be able to override his veto.
All right, speaking of courts, let's switch gears here. The president's former campaign campaign chairman, was sentenced Thursday. What do we know about the punishment Paul Manafort is facing?
Well, he was sentenced to 47 months behind bars. We're still awaiting in the coming days and weeks ahead another sentencing from a Washington, D.C. Sentencing. But 47 months is significantly less than, or fewer rather, than the 26 years that he could have gotten. So 47 months amounts, to a couple of years behind bars. He was convicted on, I believe, 8 charges of tax evasion as well as failing to disclose some financials. The White House, for their part, have tried to distance themselves from Paul Manafort. They say that these crimes were committed well before he was involved with the Trump campaign. That said, the president has not definitively said one way or another whether he would close the door completely to pardoning Paul Manafort. And in some cases, as we've reported, Elaine, the president has suggested that Paul Manafort got a quote-unquote raw deal.
So Manafort faces the harshest sentencing of anyone prosecuted by the special counsel's probe so far. Do we know how significant this sentencing was for the overall Russia investigation?
Well, I think in terms of how Paul Manafort is being portrayed within the Mueller investigation, if you look at what he was convicted of, it was not collusion. It was not in that regard, and that is something that the White House and Republicans have consistently tried to point out. That said, the Mueller probe has been widely reported, has focused on Paul Manafort in every which way, not just Paul Manafort, but also his deputy, Rick Gates, and of course Michael Cohen, who was back on Capitol Hill this week testifying behind closed doors, who, by the way, it has since emerged following reporting in the New York Times that he actually tried to get a pardon from President Trump before flipping.
Yeah, I know. It's such an interesting turn of events here, to say the least. But so let's talk about Michael Cohen, because the president's former personal attorney announced Thursday that he's suing the Trump organization for legal fees. And Cohen says that he's owed nearly $2 million. What grounds is Cohen basing his argument on?
Well, he's saying that essentially that the Trump organization didn't pay ball. Here's why this is not just a political problem, but a legal problem for the Trump organization, because it could be what's called a fishing expedition. And so Lanny Davis, who is one of the Clinton orbit attorneys who is now working with Michael Cohen, and Michael Cohen's legal team now have the opportunity to, try to get as much evidence as they can from the Trump organization. The Trump organization has been feeling it not just from Michael Cohen and his legal team, but also from the Mueller investigation, also from Congress, and also from the New York court. And if there's any indication, based upon the sources and staffers that I've spoken with in the last week since Michael Cohen's public hearing on Capitol Hill, get ready, because some Trump organization officials might have to be testifying publicly before Congress.
All right. Kevin Cirilli, never a dull moment. Always great to have you, Kevin. Thanks so much.
Appreciate the time, Elaine. Thank you.